Welcome to the Dentist Report. I'm Dennis Richardson. Most of us know the United Way. We think we have a relationship with the organization and we think we know its history. But things change. Our communities have changed a great deal. Our access to resources has changed. The composition of a community has changed. So it'll be interesting to learn how the United Way has also adapted to these new changes in community and how to move us forward in a more energized and synchronized way. Our guest today is Jeff Richardson, who's the Executive Director of the United Way for Central New Brunswick. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks, Dennis.
And it begins. A lot of people think they know what the United Way is because you have a brand, you have name recognition, and a long history. But things have changed over the past 30, 40 years. So can you bring our audience up to speed with how you would like people to understand the United Way today?
Sure, yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, we've been around forever and have a brand that's known internationally because there are United Ways all around the world, and there's 108 of us in Canada alone. All of us are independent and autonomous and focused just on our own communities. And I think that a lot of people understand us as an umbrella fundraiser. Right, that has sort of been the idea all along, the community chest, that if we all chip into one place, then we can support all of our charities out of this one area. And that is, you know, if we were to simplify it, that is part of what we do. It's massive fundraising to support our community. But the evolution of United Ways over the last, say, 10 to 20 years has been towards a collective impact model. So at 50,000 feet, yes, it looks like a big fundraiser that then goes out to charities in the community. But at the ground level at our United Way, what we're really trying to do is to say, okay, what here in Central New Brunswick and Fredericton, Oromocto, those surrounding areas, what are the biggest issues facing our society in sort of three areas, in community, in poverty, and helping kids, and what are the solutions to those problems? So we really want to be a convener around those issues to say, okay, how do we address the number of kids that are going to school hungry? How do we address the number of people who are in the shelters and help move them into supportive housing? So when the funds are raised, they're strategically invested in these issues, not in charity specifically, but in addressing these issues. So to say, here's the solution we want. Here are the best folks to do it together, rather than as individual charities in silos around the province.
That's a distinct shift from your brand recognition over the years, because the time-effective, cost-effective, all-together now fundraising model to trying to point at a social issue, because technically United Way doesn't really deliver any services, do they? You fund the organizations that do.
That's correct.
Which would mean on that grassroots level, those organizations need to, does it help them get their act together? One of the challenges over time, and the voluntary sector is a sector a lot of people don't have their radar up with. It's not common in the business section of the newspaper. It's not common. We know it by its bits. Boy Scouts, Girl Guides, Boys and Girls Clubs, that kind of thing. So they struggle to get their act together as a sector. So does United Way help them play a role, given that your new funding model pushes towards specific social issues as opposed to program?
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't. It's not so much a shift as an evolution, right? So it's getting better at what we do, I think. Okay. So I think when where we're helpful is in creating those partnerships that can address the social issues. So in some ways, it's getting their act together, and in a lot of more ways, it's about creating being more effective and creating greater impact. An example is the Community Action Group on Homelessness, right? So this is a network of 20 plus local organizations who all deal with homelessness in some way, who until about 10 years ago were acting largely independently. This group has brought them together to say, okay, we want to end chronic and episodic homelessness in the city. We're going to do that together. Here's the plan for all of us to do it together. So in some ways, get our act together, work together, be more effective. I think that's what our drive would be on any issue, is to say, how do we address this as a community rather than as individual charities out there trying our best.
So it sounds like United Way has a role to play maybe on two fronts. One of them would be the financial fundraising, and the other one is facilitating or encouraging that kind of convergence and conversation.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's the goal, really, is to, how do we mobilize folks to work together to solve problems? And we can do a lot. We can bring people together, and we can also invest in those strategies that are going to make a difference.
That makes me think a little bit of politics and politicians.
Okay.
Having done, figure that out, but having done a recent federal election, some of the messaging from some politicians was about the money they brought into the constituency or into the riding. So they're defined by their actions, which is money. But there's a much larger role for the politician to play as the connector, because that person can encourage or facilitate the conversations. So it sounds like there's an opportunity here for more of those large-scale conversations that have a greater social impact, and United Way would be part of that.
I think that's absolutely true, and the money piece is the challenging piece, and I think there wouldn't be many charities in our region who would tell you this was a really easy year to fundraise, right, or a really easy couple of years to fundraise. So we do have to figure out how to do more with the funding that is available, and that working together addresses that. Right?
Does it ever come up in your world that there's a lot that could be done without money? Because the focus is money, so people get goal focused, and here's the targets for the year, and we'll get to that in a bit. But does it also come up, there's a whole bunch of things we can do that don't even require any new money?
It does, and that's why that's part of the facilitation role we try to play in bringing people together. If you're talking, if you're sitting across from all different kinds of organizations who are working in the same sector as you, you're identifying your common goals, common initiatives, and there are definitely ways that coming together and working together becomes about the process rather than how much more money is available or how much, and it's nice to see that work. I think it's hard to get there, right? It's easy to do when you're sitting around the table talking about how we're going to collaborate. It's harder when you go back to your office and sit at your desk and look at your financial statements and your fundraising for the year and think, oh gosh, okay, we better get out there on our own again and do this thing. So I wouldn't suggest in any way that, here we've solved this problem and now it's this way. It's an ongoing, it's an evolution to keep people together, to keep the community strong and working together and going in the same direction. Right?
And much grace for the people and the volunteer organizations that have popped up addressing social needs, because that's the nature of that sector. It's altruistic. They volunteer because they felt a tug somewhere deep inside themselves, and they wanted to go make it better. And there isn't the energy or the focus to catch that just over here, maybe 3 degrees, there's another organization doing something pretty similar to the same people that you're trying to help. And that's the nature of the past 40, 50 years. We've gotten into specialization. The altruistic drive lets you kind of make it your cause. But we're entering a new era where we've got all kinds of resources. We need to figure out how to put them together a bit better. So that fits that theme. Interesting to think of United Way as a process, not just the fundraising entity. That's the beginnings of a whole new conversation. Much luck with it yet? How goes it with the staff or with the board with this subtle and shift into a new role?
Oh, I think it goes well. It is subtle, and we've been very, I think, slow and cautious in our evolution, right? Because we're coming up on 60 years of funding organizations and investing in organizations in our community. So radical shifts can really upset sort of an ecosystem. So I think it's important. One of our driving, for any change is to engage the agencies we work with on an ongoing basis, because they're the experts too, right? Like not all the knowledge lives with United Way. So to make sure that we're saying, okay, here's what we're thinking, here's what we think is the way to go for our community. How does that resonate with you? Does this match your objectives? Will this work? Tell us if we're wrong. we want to engage and to make sure that we're working with the folks in our community. We're a local organization, and we have to look at what our local priorities are, what the donors think we should be doing, what the agencies who are going to do that work with the programs and services on the ground, what they know about how society can change.
Let's slide a bit to your infrastructure. So how many staff do you have?
There are 4.5 of us right now, and then we get to 5.5 in the summer when we get a student intern. So we're pretty lean.
And you board 12, 14?
Yeah, between 12 and 15 at any given time on our board of directors. And then we have various committees which will engage, more volunteers throughout the year. So we're largely volunteer driven.
Why I asked the infrastructure question, because of the shift to process and helping encourage more conversations that integrate and synergize volunteer organizations to be more cooperative, collaborative. That's a different workload than the annual fundraising campaign that you're known for. So interesting for people to be aware that there's only so many staff, and it's going to be providing those moments, I guess, where they can come and have conversations, not doing all the work.
That's right.
The work's got to be shared.
That's exactly it. And I would say, our team is it's cross-functional, right? So that we have a director of community development and a director of resource development, and their offices are side by side, and they work together on everything. It's all hands on deck all year round, depending on what the focus is. So that's a nice thing about having a small team and being able to work together.
Do you have a youth element as well?
We do, yeah. We have 3 focus areas, and one of them is sort of helping kids be all they can be. And so the focus in there is around, we work with organizations like the Boys and Girls Club and the Fredericton, the Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and organizations like that. And we also have programs that work in schools, in the school system. So we work in the elementary school and help teachers with programming around kindness and compassion and being a student leader. In the high schools, we work with student impact committees where basically we help them set up a mini United Way. So they've got a certain amount of funding that they can invest in their local community. They take applications to make their community better, and they have their board meetings, and we coach them on sort of what to look for when you're investing in a local charity, and then they award the money at the end of the year. So it's a neat process for them, and that carries on into universities and colleges where we have a student United Way. So we try to work with kids and youth quite a bit.
Great. Sometimes through social media, and you and I had a private conversation about this about a year ago, for clarity's sake is where I want to go. Sometimes there'll be a flash through social media about the pay scales for some CEOs for United Way. And people should be attentive to doing their homework to find out what the real numbers are, or to find out what it is for your local area. So the flash, of course, is a negative story about how much money CEOs make in charities, and money's supposed to go to the kids and that whole culture and dynamic. So do you want to, without the details, but the general, just give people a sense of the scale, because it's not a place you go to work in order to get rich.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's a fair comment.
It's got a different drive, right? There's a different reason you're doing this.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. I mean, first on the social media stuff, that's something that we're addressing on an ongoing basis, right? Now and then there will be, somebody will say, well, I saw on Facebook that you make $350,000 a year and have a private car. So that's not true. So some of it sort of defies. There's a gut check piece on, and then some of it. The other side of that spectrum, though, is that there can be a feeling too that, well, these organizations should be run by volunteers and there should be no overhead too, right? So I think there's a lot of ground between that. What I would encourage folks to do when if they want to know what the charities in the community are, what their expenses are, pop onto the CRA's website and Google your charity, right? There's a really quick front page there that says they spend this much on admin, this much on fundraising, this much on the programs in the community. I'm proud of what our ratios are.
Good. You want to share them?
Sure, yeah. Last year we spent 19%, so that was 7 on administration and 12 on our fundraising costs. So that's great, and that's great for us. I think what I would encourage folks to do is look into their local charities and go beyond those numbers, because they don't really speak to the impact that an organization's having, right? Exactly. First of all, I think we hold our charities to standards that we would never expect a business to succeed with, right? We'd never say to a business, well, you can't spend on marketing, you can't spend on communications, you can't, we don't, you're not to, there's a wage freeze here, and you're not to make any more than just above the, there's all kinds of different standards that we hold charities to. I think that's good, right? We have to make sure the donor dollar is being respected, but we also have to make sure that we're not hampering charities and nonprofits so much that they can't do their work. So I don't think there's it's pretty easy to eyeball. You can see when costs are out of line, but I think that you really have to look at each individual charity and nonprofit on its own and then make a determination.
Similar conversations with business people on the show. They'll talk about efficiencies of models, expectations, return on investment, those sorts of things. What I find fascinating is the creep of the business language into a different sector. It's like the business wants its language to be the dominant language. But you just mapped out how the voluntary sector has its own operational model, has its own measures, and that there's an incompleteness to CRA measure is only one piece of it, because what's not being measured is the impact into the community. There's an efficiency there that businesses should aspire to for whether it's volunteer labor force and the work that gets done, or how $1 turns into X number of dollars of activity in a community. But it's on important, almost invisible things like literacy and health and child well-being, and whereas that's very different from selling enough widgets to make the profit I was looking for this year.
For sure.
And then the third sector, of course, is the government sector, which has its own operational model. So could you explore a bit into the bigger impact that doesn't get measured by CRA?
For sure, I think, and I'll be clear too that I think the CRA measure is important, right? It's what keeps us accountable and what makes sure that we're.
But it's not the whole picture, though.
Not at all, not at all. And that's, I would say, another, when we talk about the shift that United Way has made, and I think that lots of charities are making, because they have to. This is the standard that their funders are holding them to account with is around. So what are your outcomes? Right. So what are your outcomes?
The justification.
Let's talk about not just how many people you're serving, right? But how their lives are being changed. What do you want to see? What do you want to see if we're investing in literacy? What do you want to see? How many people do you want to teach to read this year? And how will you know you got there? These kinds of things. If you're looking at with our plan to end homelessness in Fredericton, we have measures there that are about how many, how are we going to, not just, how many people we're housing, but how are we doing that? How are we supporting them through their journey and these kinds of things? So it's important with all the agencies we work with, we ask them to work on that. What are your outcomes? How are you going to track your success? Okay, now we can see that this didn't work. What are you going to do to adjust that? Why didn't it work? How can we help? How can we support?
Yeah. Practical. But there's another element too, is the emotional element, because impacting someone's life, to have them have the opportunity to make a shift, to make things better. It'd be interesting if CRA or if United Way could create a happiness index as a secondary element to, because sometimes the measure won't be a concrete outcome. Sometimes the measure will be, it'll just feel good. Yeah. And that'll create a shift in the whole community.
Yeah. You're right.
Does that come up at all?
It does. It does. Especially when we're thinking, about what we look like today and what we want to look like in the future, right? So a lot of this language around, outcomes evaluation and measurement, and this comes up with our committee, and they'll say, well, look, we have this great program here that's making our community happier, it's making it stronger, that's engaging people in ways they haven't been engaged before, and there's an element of inclusion here, and it just doesn't fit into this new online program that you want me to punch the data into and measure. My program will never be measured like this. Does that mean it's not valuable? Not at all, right? So the challenge to us is to be nimble, elastic, and flexible enough to recognize that we're not going to be able to measure everything the same way, and if we got there, but gosh, we're probably missing a piece, right? if we're eliminating that kind of thing. So there's a lot of juggling, Dennis, and we I think we get it right a lot of the time, and if we do get it wrong, we want to know and we want to work to make it better. Right?
Yeah, But that's also a pulse of all the larger social changes going on anyway. If you go global, the world's population is going to double by 2047. So we have to pay more attention to how we share resources, whether they're human
Yes.
or
Yep.
natural environment. So you're kind of ahead of the curve as an organization that way, to put in place processes and systems where there's more conversation going on, and the measures aren't always economic. So tied to that, you organize a first of kind of event at the Playhouse in Fredericton a couple of months ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you want to wander into that, because it speaks very much to the community soul?
Sure,
But the
yeah.
business person or the person who needs to take a measure would see it in terms of here's a dollar spent on these organizations.
Yeah,
but what
absolutely.
what you initiated was something that had nothing to do with those measures.
That's right. Well, I mean, I think one of the most challenging thing any charity will tell you is how do we tell our story, right? Now, you just gave me the opportunity at the top here to explain a complex model, United Way, right? A lot of people know United Way, but they know we do good.
They think they know, but if you've
Yeah.
shifted part of your operations, then they need to hear that.
That's right, yeah. So one of our goals this year is, can we tell our story better, right? We can tell you, sure, how much of $1 you donate goes towards program, but what does that really mean? So we wanted to do two things: to try to sort of explain what we do, and to say thank you to the donors and the volunteers who support United Way year after year, coming on 60 years now. So we worked with the Shivering Songs Festival, Shivering Songs, and Theatre New Brunswick to develop an evening of storytelling where we had individuals whose lives have been changed by a United Way supportive program or service work with TMB to craft their story, to say, you know what, here's where I was. Here's the sort of intervention that I experienced, and here's where I am now. And you know, maybe I'm still on my journey, but I'm better because this community cared enough to give their dollars, to volunteer their time, to work with me one-on-one to get me there. So we had them share their stories, work with TMB to develop their stories, and then we partnered with Shivering Songs to have some musicians who were coming in for their Winter Folk Festival to write original compositions based on these stories, and then we presented them in tandem, sort of story and song and story and song, at the Playhouse to kick off the festival, and it was an interesting process for us. It was new for United Way to sort of say, okay, we're going to partner with these arts organizations to tell our story, who jumped on it. I can't say enough about TMB and Shivering Songs for adopting the model, and then present it to the city with a real emphasis, not so much on here's what United Way does, but here's what the community does. Here's how Fredericton and surrounding areas continue to support the most vulnerable folks in our community who sometimes need a hand, right? So that was the idea. I'm glad you liked it.
Well, what was it like afterward? Because putting it together, people being willing to tell their stories. I think there were 6 or so stories told, and musicians collaborating. But also, you were breaking new ground with this community narrative approach, and heartfelt, soulful. Sometimes it hurt. Sometimes it's very, very joyful. You know, that's a wonderful place to invite people into. After it was done, did you get much feedback?
We did, yeah, we did. So it ranged. It was all over the place. But one of the more common is sort of I understood what you did, sort of academically, or sort of I know that, oh yes, this helps people, but I didn't realize they were my neighbors necessarily, right? I didn't understand what their personal journey was like, or what a big difference I'm making, right? When I say, yeah, sure, I'll give you $14 off every paycheck this year, and I know that'll help people. So it created, I think it helped round out that story. And it also, I mean, one of the stories was from the Big Brothers, Big Sisters, right? This really nice story. This big sister and a little brother who had this relationship for 15 years now. Well, 3 people went over to Big Brothers, Big Sisters the next day to say, I can do this. I know what it is now, and I want to help too. So it had that impact as well. So we didn't, we didn't know what to expect, but we're glad we went on the journey, and I think we'll continue that storytelling in the fall again, I think.
Good,
Yeah.
good, because do it 2 or 3 or 4 times to let it weave its way into the community's fabric.
Mm-hmm.
Any sense of other United Ways around the province maybe snipping at the idea and saying, yeah, you did that thing in Fredericton, maybe we should do one in other places?
Yeah, I
Any
know
plans?
that. I don't want to commit anyone, but I know
Sure.
that United Way of Moncton, of Greater Moncton and Southeastern New Brunswick, thought, this is a good way to tell our story. This is a good way to reach out and say, when you donate to United Way, here's the kind of change that can happen in your community. So I think you'll see it in Moncton and perhaps in St. John as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
This is a good spot for us to pause for a
Sure.
moment. So we'll be right back after a couple of messages. So thank you for tuning in today. Our guest is Jeff Richardson, who's the Executive Director of the United Way in Central New Brunswick. And when we left off, we were talking about a special event organized, the first for community storytelling and the heartfelt connection. That the impact of your donation to United Way focusing on 3 or 4 key areas, and watch what happens in a community. And it makes you feel good, which is the ultimate measure, not the economic return on investment. Pet peeve. You've got a whole challenge coming in front of you. Can you wander into some of the things that you would like to see improve, or where you think you need shifts to occur, from community awareness or the business community needing to be more aware of what you do? Mm-hmm. Just what's going to make things better for us? Because you're now positioned as one of those leaders about show us how we can do this better.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things. We need to always be engaged in understanding the issues in our community.
Well, you're in the compassion. You intersect directly with compassion.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. The so to understand them, I think compassionately, right, as you say, and the root causes as well, yeah. And then to work outside of our silos to figure out the best way to address them. And I know that sounds very general so far, but if you stay with me, I'm not, like, one of where we're making really good progress is in breaking down the silos between our charities and our nonprofits, and getting on the same page, yeah. For those of us who are aligned around certain issues, working together towards those issues. I think another silo to break down would be to better engage, and this is on us as much as yep. the other side, with the business community, yep. right? Yep. We do a fairly good job of knocking on the door, yeah. and asking for money. Yeah. I think that we can up our game by engaging business in the problem solving and the solutions as well. So there's some opportunity there moving forward. I don't think we have any other choice, right, than to stop pretending that we're in separate spheres necessarily. That
yeah.
We are all in this together.
And yes, and chances are the same might apply for government. Some of its funding models and its 4-year cycles, and the political influence on, we're going to fund this for 4 years, and then it shifts to another thing, and charity scrambles because it takes 2 years to yeah. get it implemented. Just as you start to get going, we're not funding that anymore. Underneath all this, and it's fun to dive into the deep end of it, is the ask also includes asking them to let go of the way they've always done it. So do you get that sense? I could picture a business person saying, hey, I got 40 requests a week. Holy moly, and everybody wants a nickel out of me, and I'm just trying to hold my company together. I'm just trying to hold my business together. HST, GST just went up, and minimum wage is going to go up. I'm barely holding it together, and now you need this. Yeah. So there's that sense of loss or less than, rather than the sense of we have everything we need. We just need to put it together better. Can you wander into that? What would the business person, so if you had the ultimate pitch to the business community about supporting United Way, mm-hmm. and how United Way is having a different influence amongst all the charities that it's connected to it, what does the business community need to let go of with its approach to how it does its sponsorship or fundraising dollar? Mm-hmm. Do they need to let go of what are you going to do with this money? Do they need to let go of how much is going to your salary? Do they need to let go of all the old models?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what they need to let go of. I know that we could stand to get a little more creative sometimes around what they can contribute, right? So not everyone, for example, can do a payroll deduction campaign, and not everyone can make a corporate donation. But we have really successful models where we've, around something we do call a day of caring, for example, where we bring several businesses, companies out together to work directly with some of the agencies we partner with on a big project. Now that can range from, we want to put a new garden bed outside school and start to create a local community garden where folks can, harvest right there and use them in the lunch in the cafeteria. Yeah. Or it can be, our greatest need in this organization is we have, zero IT support, zero tech skills. Is there any way your IT company could come in for a day and sort of do an audit of what we need in terms of our IT systems and help us get to the level where we're functioning better? Yeah. So engaging the skills of sort of the caring businesses and companies that we work with right now in a way that they can directly help the organizations in our community is a big deal. Is there a dollar attached to that? Well, sure, and that employees are giving, your staff is going out and contributing their time elsewhere. So it's not a corporate donation, but I think there's value not only for the organization gets the work done, but they're also getting a chance to expose what they do to a whole new group of folks who may have never didn't have a clue what law-backed literacy did, or what what happened, what it looks like when you step into the Fredericton homeless shelters, right? So there's a nice trade-off there, and you're building community and some collegiality between the companies and the agencies in the community. So outside of a pure funding scope, there's that piece as well. Yeah.
Is there something similar on the government side? Meaning, that bit that I ranted a bit about governments changing their funding model for 4 years. Randy Hatfield, the past guest on the show, talked about the frustrations of the Human Development Council in St. John, in that whenever there's a change in the cycle of government, it causes a ripple effect into voluntary sector because it shifts in the funding model. So what is it that government may need to let go of so that things can become more efficient? Is it, and now it'll be a tougher one to change possibly because it's policy driven, and it's trying to shift to evidence-based policy, which sounded very much like what you were talking about at the beginning, measuring outcomes. This is justification for the financial element. But there's the dance between the three parts needs to hear the same music. So where would the shift be? What would suggestions be for the government side of things to loosen up? Because I know they're doing great stuff on homelessness. I know they're doing great stuff on poverty with the poverty reduction strategy, but there's more.
Well, I think you're right that there are pieces that are on the right track, right? Okay, so we're getting really good at consulting. Right, and getting out into the community, and I don't mean that necessarily facetiously, right?
Well, you say consulting, and I think of people in the budget process, and they'll have their own expectation of what consulting means. But you have got a different, have a different thing in mind.
Well, no, but I mean, they're related, right? I've heard that it doesn't, maybe sometimes it doesn't feel like real consultation, right? Or maybe we get away from. We're in the room and we hear from the 100 people at the round tables who show up, and then they go away and. Well, what actually came of that? What happened, right? So,
well, they had the budget drafted before we even talked to them, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah,
but that's just specifically out of that topic and that theme. It's not the same when it comes to other areas.
No, that's right. So I've been around in other ones, like the non-budget ones, where we're talking about how do we reduce poverty in the province, and you have a lot of knowledgeable, passionate folks from every community, from organizations in every community coming to the table and saying a lot of the same things, right? So I don't know the solution, right, to move it forward, but I think that's a good start, and to continue to consult with folks in the community and the ground level who know, right, who've had the experience in ending poverty in their community, or rather addressing poverty in their community, and getting some of that compassion and heart and caring piece into it, and then some sustainability around addressing the plan, right? So I take Randy's point, it would be it's challenging. I would agree with him that if things do shift every 4 years, it's hard to make long-term change.
Yeah. Do you think, or can you map out for the business audience in the show, the connection between improving something in the community and how that's good for business?
Sure. Yeah.
Because a lot of times business will say, well, how will this help my business? And for me, it's like, well, it's self-evident truth. If you've got higher literacy levels, if you've got happier kids and adults, if you've got more infrastructure in place socially, then you've got a great community that's humming. That would be good for business. But you've got more hands-on experience with that. So how do we get the business community to see that these are good things that will come back to them?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you started down the road exactly right? There's the global piece, right? So it's not necessarily that you're going to see a return to the individual business on the, in terms of how society has improved. So my business is better now. So it's not going to be that direct just then. Yep. But I mean, a good example I think would be for anyone who's followed the community action group's plan on homelessness, plan to end homelessness, right? If you have a flip through that, you'll see yes, I mean, the top line, people housed, that makes sense, right? That's good for our community. There's a business case in there too, around reduced costs to public safety, reduced costs to health, right? Fewer nights in jail, fewer ER visits, less need, less stress on other pieces of the system, right? So that yes, there is a cost to ending homelessness, right? Yeah. It's going to cost us money, but the savings elsewhere in sort of ensuring that that we have a healthier community. You're going to see that, right? So there's the case, I think.
That's a great example. And it probably, if the math was done, you could find it in other sectors. So if you spend $70,000 on housing a person for a year with the supports needed to help them through the different issues, the benefits to community is savings of over $300,000 in all these other interventions that would come because the police have to be called to go up to the emergency because somebody's up there because they're cold and they don't have a place to sleep, but they're causing a disturbance. And what's fascinating is it takes that sort of economic argument for the compassion to finally show up that the human animal needs shelter in order to deal with any of the other issues that they might have humming in their life. And we made that a reward for past 50 years. You don't get that shelter until you take care of all these other things.
Well, how has that worked? Right?
That's a good question, actually. How's that work?
But what we have seen in communities that have tried housing first, which is sort of the philosophy that our plan to end homelessness is built on, is that if you give them, you give someone a home first and shelter, that's going to make the difference, right? Forget about the addictions, forget about the all that other stuff. I mean, if you imagine like this is what I say, imagine starting your day, everything you have to do today, but you don't have a roof over your head. Think of how much harder your day is going to be, right? So there's that, and there's if it is $300,000 or whatever the savings are, if it's $300, you also have an individual who is no longer homeless. Right, so there's a lot of value there. I think.
Big time in terms of the spirit of the place and for them too, and then start to feel good. That's very much what you brought with your evening of stories and song. It was really nice to see that. What juices you with this stuff? Like, what's exciting for you? It's 3 years now. You've been the executive director. You're probably typical of the other United Way executive directors. You see all kinds of potential and all kinds of opportunities. What would you like to see happen in the next couple of short term or long term?
What would I? Well, I'm a bit of a systems geek, what gets me and got me into this work, like I think with everyone, is a passion for change, right? A passion for community, to see that this place will be a better place to live for everyone who lives here. In the day-to-day, in the mechanical working, I love seeing organizations working together to address change. I love seeing something, taking this, here's this problem, how do we solve it as a community? Because we can, right? We've got all the resources here. It's not gonna work, in my opinion, if I'm over here trying to solve this issue and Dennis, you're over here trying to solve this one. we're going to have 50 more years of the same, right? So that's what keeps me going, is can we get our community humming to a place where we're working together to address issues? And it's that's a cliche, I think. We hear this a lot. It's in a lot of, well, you referenced, elections and whatnot. That's a rallying cry. I want to see the community working together. When you actually get there, it's hard to get it working. It takes a while to get there, but chipping away at it and seeing the successful examples, that's what keeps me going. Yeah.
Yeah, the shift from a conflict model to or a competitive model to a cooperative model.
Yeah.
It's interesting because people are used to competing. Even the charities are used to competing with each other.
Yeah. It's that's an unfortunate happening of our system. Yeah.
But what about for you personally? So you're systems geek. You like to see people finding ways to work together. But so say it's 10 years from now, and you've been at the gig for 10 years, 13 years. Your hair is grayer. You've got different glasses. Things have shifted.
Sure.
So what does it look like? What
Yeah.
does United Way, what does it morph into? Is it a social planning mechanism that integrates the three sectors? Does it take on that role? Is it stay the monetary model? Like, where would you like to see it go for the benefit of the whole province?
Yeah, I'd like to see us with clear plans to address a couple of main issues, right? So I think that when we look at poverty reduction, particularly, and we look at food insecurity in the province, in our part of the province anyway, and housing folks, I think that these are areas that we can address, right? Like we can do this. We can make positive changes there. So I'd like to see a well-oiled strategic plan, right?
Yeah.
To address these that convenes all the right players. I don't think, part of the collective impact model is it, and this is why I struggle with this question, and maybe it makes me a bad executive director too, is that it doesn't matter who gets credit for having done so, right? So of course I want United Way to have played a role in doing this, but I want us to be able to bring the community together that we're working to address these issues. So that's where I want to see United Way in 10 years for sure, is having convened community change.
Yeah. So you, part of the challenge is I gave you a question that was kind of general,
Yeah.
and it wants to come back with a concrete answer, but you're true to course in that it's a process answer. So I can't tell you what the outcomes are, but I know the process kind of looks like this. You use the phrase collective impact model. Is that what you were describing earlier in this interview about how the measures are slightly different, but it's collective impact?
Yeah. It's one thing that, when try to drop as much jargon as you can. I mean, that's what I mean by working together, right? Is saying, okay, who's best suited for which part of this project? And we're all working, it's, I know you like the coaching metaphors, right? So it's about getting all the players going in the same direction down the field with the same goal.
Because no one's really taken on that role after, so much growth in the voluntary sector in the 80s and 90s as governments offloaded services into the community, expecting community to pick up the slack. I think a stat, last research was a while ago, 10 new charities a day, every day in Canada for almost a 15-year window in the 80s and the 90s. It's the largest sector growing, but media doesn't cover it as a sector. It covers the grip and grin photo with the check from the United Way for the Boys and Girls Club. So that's a whole shift in narrative that's really important, and for the audience to understand and the other two sectors to understand. How about for yourself though, where is it a career path? Can someone have a career doing this sort of work? Because when people think of looking for work, they don't think of immediately looking for a job working with a charity. But it's professional now. There's so many people working in that sector, and they need a unique skill set. So maybe wonder there, what's the skill set needed to manage these sorts of things?
Well, there are different pieces of it, right? So I think I'll fully admit that I was, I kind of fell into the sector based on the things I was interested in doing, right? So not understanding that there are jobs in it, but that there were, it started for me in university working on food security project, and the idea was, can we can we donate from our meal plan, leftover funds from our meal plan, to the local food bank or to the Fredericton Community Kitchens? Turns out we could, and there's a whole program you can build around it and make it work, right? So yeah, it's an organization called Meal Exchange, and that was my first sort of, then I stumbled from that into this job with Meal Exchange. So you get to, I don't know that many folks necessarily set out to
have a career in the voluntary sector.
But it happens. And then, of course, there are fundraising professionals, which is a whole nother stream of that. But I think in terms of the skill set that I think you need and that I think I bring is really around the stuff that you do, right? Bringing community together for conversation, right? So convening folks, working to build strong teams that can address social issues, right? And being able to, you hear it, particularly with some of the organizations that are dealing with the harder issues. There's a compassion fatigue that can set in. It is hard work when you're working with folks who are in situations of domestic abuse, or you're getting calls from people who, are desperate because they're not going to be able to afford their power bill this month, and what do we do? And the organizations we work with do that day in, day out. It is. I have a great deal of respect for the people we work with in this city, and I think that the part of you have to, you've got to have a lot of compassion and faith and energy for change, right? You got to believe it.
Yeah. Do you think our scale can work to our advantage? Several of the guests on the show will talk about New Brunswick being 760,000 people, regardless of the linguistic differences, because there's more in common than we have different. Our access to each other, we're actually more heavily populated per square kilometer than most of the other provinces. I think we're the third or fourth most populated province in Canada. We don't think of ourselves that way. We think of ourselves as sparse. So our access to each other, our small scale, you see that as advantages for the challenges coming towards us over the next 20 years?
I think it's our biggest advantage. I'm one of these individuals who, after I graduated from St. Thomas, I moved away for almost 12 years. I lived in Toronto. And it was supposed to be 2 years, but somehow that just bled out. But I was always coming home, right? So day one on the job here, or day two, I guess, on the job here when I started with United Way back in Fredericton, I had a meeting with Premier Allward. Okay, that wasn't going to happen in Ontario, right? There was just not going to, that I would have to get to sit down and introduce myself and, meet all these MLAs who are saying, yeah, welcome, great to have you, in this job. We look forward to working with you. There's a different level of access, as you say, that we can use to our advantage. And it's, we also get a little bogged down in partisan lines sometimes, but when you have the chance to meet with folks face to face, you realize that for the most part, a lot of these folks are in it for the right reasons, want to do the best for their community too. So there's, the spirit is right and the scale is right. We got to get it over our own way sometimes, and we have to remember what we're in it for. But I think our biggest advantage is our scale. Yeah.
Right. So what's a big obstacle for us to get through it? Is it that entrenchment of this is the way we've always done it? We call it a resistance to change, but I think people like to change because it's exciting. But sometimes with creating system change, people get reluctant. So what's an obstacle that we have to get past there? What's the biggest challenge sitting in front of you for United Way? Getting past the old perception of what it was to what it's going to become?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Some of it is finding the right, you'll hear this from every charity, we're no exception, right? Do you have the capacity to do what you want to do?
Yeah.
Right? So I shared with you earlier, we're 4.5 folks, and that means we keep our administrative costs as low as we possibly can. Is that the right model? Could we, if we had a little more resource, could we do a lot more, in our community? So that's about impact, right? It's And some of that can be achieved through collaboration, right? So it's finding that, ensuring we're resourced enough and that we have the right plan moving forward. Yeah. You're not going to nail me down on a biggest anything as a Libra.
No.
I'm just not going to get there, but...
No, that's good, because those are the kinds of areas we need to wander into in general. Whether the conversation is about languages, whether the conversation is about government, there is a sense of a shift is occurring in North America, and where's New Brunswick's role in that, and how do we prepare ourselves for it? And it keeps coming up that it's more conversations where people are figuring out what they do have rather than what they don't have. And then where's the shared focus? And how you've described United Way puts you right in the middle of a large piece of all of that. Even the food security element, we only grow 8 or 9% of our own food, and we import the other 92.
Mm-hmm. So
can you wander into that a little bit? Does United Way touch on those new entities that are starting to surface around food security and our access to food? The shelter, not the shelter, the food bank in Fredericton, 3,000 people a month use it. Is that a sustainable model? What do we need to do to improve that? You must be working with organizations that are connected to all of that and where they want to go.
Yeah, we are indeed, for sure. It's a big piece of our community development side of the house, of the work we're doing around convening and understanding food security issues and developing systems to address them, to address the issues. A good example of that would be, and sorry to go to a program, but
Yeah,
there's this initiative called Community Food Smart that again brought together Greater Fredericton Social Innovation, Economic Social Inclusion Corporation, United Way, and then is whichever community entities want to join us in a bulk food buying program for produce bulk food buying program, so that people can join and purchase a bag of produce once a month. Carrots, bananas, apples, as local as possible, at about $30 less than they would in the grocery store, right? And this is because we've been able to build this community system, community-based system, where they can purchase the food in bulk and distribute it within their communities, be it at St. Thomas University, be it at the Gary Lions Club, be it in Marysville, so this sort of hub and spoke model around food distribution. It's helped people, right? It's not designed. Anybody can join. It's a club, but it certainly is helping folks who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford fresh, local, healthy food.
And it's interesting you mentioned students, because students get dinged 6 ways from Sunday on their pocketbook, whether it's the cost of tuitions, cost of books, the rent and stuff. So food is one of those tougher ones. They'll tend to go cheap on food, because that's what they have the money for, so you can't get to good food. And yet there's all kinds of studies that show your eating and sleeping habits will directly affect your learning skill sets.
Yeah. And your overall, your overall health, your overall well-being, right? If we want to be a healthy province.
So we've got about 5 minutes left.
Sure, okay.
Where do you want to wander? What do you need New Brunswick to know about United Way? And we've got the process part down. We've got its reach down. We've got that there's a shift occurring down. Is it time for, I kind of asked you a vision question earlier about where it could go and how it could go. But is there that lingering last impression that people need to hear from you about the organization, its intent, its passions, its final thoughts?
No, well, I appreciate the opportunity, Dennis, and we did cover a lot of ground. I think in final thoughts, I would say, come get to know us, and if you want to make positive change in your community, we can sure help, right? It's not all about what we're sometimes most known for, which is getting the dollars in the door, right? That's a big part of it, and we welcome that.
Because part of the old drive was the thermometer. I mean, every city had the thermometer. You had restrictions on member organizations fundraising during the United Way campaign window. There's that sense of obligation in some places, some companies, or some parts of the bureaucracy of you have to contribute to United Way. All that energy has shifted, hasn't it? It's not the same organization it was in terms of the spirit of it.
I think that's Yeah, that certainly doesn't have that spirit now. Whether how much of that spirit was accurate before, I don't know. You know, so some of it's on us to make sure we're telling our story right.
Yes.
I want, you know, you talk about, you know, the arm twisting for donations, for example.
Well, is it
I want
competitive?
people to know. I want people to feel good about their donation to United Way, right? So get to know us, and if you don't want to donate, you know, I want you to have the right facts in front of you.
Yes.
That's all. And if you choose to donate elsewhere, that's a good thing. Then you should support your community, but get the facts right first, right?
Yeah.
What we're doing.
Yeah, because over time that was eroded, and it became this internal office competition thing. And I thought, no, but that's not the spirit of the United Way. That's where they're coming from. So thank you for clarifying
Oh, happy
and make
to.
it fun.
And you know, the other thing you know, that you mentioned the thermometers as well. So that was a big decision for us to take the thermometers down, because they didn't really say anything about what we do.
Or it just branded you as the goals and the money focus.
Yeah.
And the rest of the story was absent somehow.
Mm-hmm. Now we still, you know, we're still trying to raise money. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, we have to tell the full story. So.
Because there is an efficiency to giving the money to the United Way because of your network with all the different organizations. You've added a nice layer of the storytelling by saying how you're focusing on 2 or 3 areas to help coordinate the efforts of all these different charities in those areas. I hope there are people in the audience that like that, because that's the rest of the story, because that's where the change will come from. Final thoughts.
Well, I hope they like it too, but we want to hear, you know, so I want people to get in touch and visit us and let us know what we're thinking, what they think of the work we're doing, and, you know, congratulate us, be hard on us. You know, we want to be engaged with our community as much as possible.
So they can do that at our website.
Yes, and we'll list all that. When we get the show up on YouTube, we will post the various links, because Jeff mentioned at least 3 or 4 different entities. We'll put the links there. Last thought, it's a similar for Moncton and St. John and the other United Ways. They have similar challenges to what you have here in central New Brunswick.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they do. I mean, I think we're very much, you know, we are independent organizations, but we're very aligned in our focus on community, kids, and poverty reduction. And you know, we work together quite a bit on those files. But I think our advantage as United Ways is that we are local, so we can respond to the needs of our immediate community. So I think while there are, you know, at 50,000 feet, we're all the same. Like we're all working with, you know, we all raise money, we all invest in community-based solutions. And the nuance between the cities is really around what the priorities are of the community and what's most needed.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for this.
Oh, thanks, Dennis. It's
Hope it
been
was
fun.
Yeah, it was.
Great. As always, you can find this show on YouTube on the Dennis Report if you search that. We will put the links in the comment section underneath. And thank you for watching. Be good, have fun, and love each other.